That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange eons a podcast shall rise. H.P. Lovecraft, Weird Tales, Ramsey Campbell, Cthulhu, Laird Barron, Silent Hill, Brian Lumley, Dagon. There's something sinister out there in the cosmos, and the tendrils run deep throughout the universe. Only one woman dares to traverse the web. Mary SanGiovanni, who once again is up to cosmic shenanigans.
Hi folks, welcome to Cosmic Shenanigans. This is Mary SanGiovanni, and I am up to shenanigans, as always, of cosmic proportions. And this week, partially in honor of Women in Horror Month, I'm covering a story that was co-written by H.P. Lovecraft, but written primarily by his wife, Sonia H. Greene. The story, called The Horror at Martin's Beach, is a short story that was written in June 1922 and first published as The Invisible Monster in the November 1923 issue of Weird Tales, which is Volume 2, Number 4. It has appeared since then in 2 film versions, and the story has been reprinted in Something About Cats and Other Pieces by Arkham House, The Horror in the Museum and Other Revisions, also by Arkham House, also as The Invisible Monster, The Horror in the Museum and Other Revisions, a subsequent edition where it is retitled The Horror at Martin's Beach, and where I read it, The Love Dead and Other Revisions by Carroll and Graf Publishers. Now, what makes this story interesting, I have heard, I think when I covered another story that Lovecraft wrote with Hazel Heald, we talked about the degree to which Lovecraft got involved in some of these co-written stories. I think that in many cases, Lovecraft did some substantial revisions to an original draft submitted by one of these co-authors. And I think that he also lent, his connections, if not his name as well, to the author, to this part, to particular co-authors, for the opportunity to be published in places that were maybe harder to break into. My understanding from some, research and reading about his co-writing this story with Sonia Greene is that this was her idea, and mostly, her take on this. You can tell maybe less influence of Lovecraft in, I should say not so much less influence in style, but perhaps less of his actual writing in it, based on how it's a lot more straightforwardly written. It is generally his structure, his narrative structure, where they announce that a horrible thing has happened, that the revelation of this horrible thing can't be forgotten. And then you get, what led up to this, and then ultimately the revelation of what this horrible thing actually was. And then a reiteration that this is something, that has these far-reaching implications, and it's something that can't be forgotten. But there's a definite cosmic horror aspect to this story, to the horror at Martin's Beach. But I believe that, if in reading this stylistically, it seems to me, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me that he may have done a pass through this, but that there's a distinctive other voice in this, and that Sonia Greene, I think, maybe perhaps because of his relationship with her, or maybe because she was a competent writer in her own right, there seems to be less of Lovecraft having to fix things. I mean, there's a little bit of his language in there. Something is described as cyclopean, and little things like that, and of course there is that sort of structure, but I get the sense that the bulk of the content, the bulk of the meaning is Sonia Greene's. Now, we have certain definite cosmic horror aspects to it. We have, for example, the setting as the ocean. And we know that Lovecraft found the ocean particularly terrifying, both for, I think, I should say that in his stories, there is a sense that the ocean is particularly terrifying, both because I think of the alien nature of the life in it, and its utterly inhuman aspect, I think. And also, I think, because the ocean, like space, represents a great unknown, a void, a potential breeding ground for things beyond the realm of imagination. And I think that much like outer space, the ocean served as you know, a fertile space for him to allow the creation of some of these monstrosities that could be, you know, potentially undiscovered yet, when so much of the earth already has been. So we have the ocean as this sort of cosmic setting, like, you know, like space, this endless, black, you know, abyss where within its depths are creatures that we can't imagine. And then, of course, we have the creature itself. Now, it is described by Lovecraft, okay, in certain ways that I think both reflect a creature of nature and a creature of supernatural degree. There's even something of the suggestion of the alien here, that maybe these things live in the ocean, but came from someplace else. Either that, or there's the possibility that, our own Earth, this cosmic, part of our own planet, has creatures like this. Either way, you get the sense of something, incredibly, unbelievably large, and, of this sort of cosmic proportion of its potential for anger. And much like we said about his gods and his pantheon in general, it would have been content to leave us alone until mankind interfered. And that's when we get the revelation that this horror exists, which is very much a Lovecraftian approach to this kind of material. The creature is described as, quote, "The object was some 50 feet in length, of roughly cylindrical shape, and about 10 feet in diameter. It was unmistakably a gilled fish in its major affiliations, but with certain curious modifications, such as rudimentary forelegs and six-toed feet in place of pectoral fins, which prompted the widest speculation. Its extraordinary mouth, its thick and scaly hide, and its single deep-set eye were wonders scarcely less remarkable than its colossal dimensions. And when the naturalists pronounced it an infant organism, which could not have been hatched more than a few days, public interest mounted to extraordinary heights." So what we have here is a creature, and the basic plot of this is that Captain Orne, who was a captain of a whaling ship, after something like a 40-hour battle with this monstrous sea creature, manages to kill this being. And the being, it turns out, is just a baby, just a newborn infant, essentially. And it still was that difficult for them to kill it. There is some speculation by scientists that it may have been something actually, far less simple-minded than a fish. That, given that it's, when it was studied, because it is basically, once they kill it, they take it on shore and they examine it. They find out that it was possibly a sentient creature, something capable of more complex thought, at least more complex thought than a fish. And people are fascinated by it. And so this captain is making a lot of money displaying it on the shore and near his boat at Martin's Beach. And so basically this thing, it has been murdered, poked, prodded, dissected in parts, studied, and then put on display. Well, what happens is that one night, a storm comes and washes the thing overboard, along with the guy who was watching keeping an eye on it, while everybody else is at the Wavecrest Inn on the beach, celebrating this particular victory. And despite their best efforts, Captain Orn and his crew can't find it. It is washed out somewhere. And one night shortly thereafter, people on the beach and people at this inn who happened to observe this say that they thought they saw this immense shadow moving through the water, coming toward the shore. And it reaches a certain point near the rocks, and it lets out this inhuman cry, a cry that Greene describes as one that would elicit sympathy, that it would elicit empathy, because it is clearly a cry of pain. It is a cry of loss. And that's one of the differences of the two that I want to talk about with this particular story, which are not usually elements of cosmic horror, and which are often, I think, relegated to, or at least considered to be the domain of women writers, but I think are, as such, sometimes overlooked for their power, and for the impact that they have. One of the most terrifying, powerful, vengeful forces in nature, one of the most aggressive and dangerous forces in nature, is a mother's protectiveness of her child. And that is true of human beings, and it is particularly true of animals. And I think that what Sonia is suggesting here in this story is that one of the most terrifying aspects of nature may actually translate to other beings beyond nature. And while this is something I think perhaps that we can understand, something we can relate to, it is also somehow just as terrible and just as terrifying because it is magnified to a cosmic scale here. Maybe it is more terrifying because our sense of sympathy for the people who killed this infant entity is diminished some by the sorrow of the mother at discovering the body of this baby creature. Or perhaps, as readers and as the observers on the shore, it is implied, are feeling, discover that, a mother's revenge is also somehow far more terrible when, again, magnified to this cosmic scale. I think it is something that Lovecraft might not have understood on his own. It is something that I think, while fathers maybe understand wanting to avenge their children if their children are hurt, I don't know that there is as much a sense of the natural ferocity and the absolute unrelenting aggression in a mother's desire to protect or avenge a child who has been hurt. And it is the theme of countless stories, countless thrillers, a lot of something often relegated to sequels of, creature movies or monster movies. But I think that what Sonia Greene here is doing is emphasizing it as powerful and unrelenting and inexorable a force of nature as anything else cosmic horror ever tackles. And it is something to be considered. We also don't often see the entities in Lovecraft's mythos. There are a couple, but the entities in Lovecraft's mythos, we don't often see them as feminine beings, as female creatures. they're often attributed either no sex at all or no gender at all, or they are masculine, they're male in some way, or it's just assumed that they're masculine or male in some way. It's interesting that this being is assigned a specific gender in the sense of the approach of, in the, not so much the baby, because the description of the entity doesn't seem to indicate a particular sex. But we get a sense of, what comes for it, what comes for the people who killed it, as being something of a the terrible power of the goddess type of a situation. And we understand as the story progresses that in cosmic horror fashion, this isn't just a big angry fish. It is described as being connected to the moon, that it moves along the silvery beams of moonlight, that it moves with the tide, which is very connected to the moon. And the moon is often, in many pagan religions, attributed to, as is water, a certain goddess role, a certain power of the feminine, which also, again, suggests that this being is an angry mother. And what this being is capable of, the horror at Martin's Beach, is her revenge. She can't resurrect her child. So when beachgoers hear this cry, they think it's the cry of a person who's drowning, and they throw a life preserver tied to a big long rope out to the ocean. And all of them, including Captain Orne, grab this rope and are trying to pull the person to safety, and find that the force pulling in the opposite direction is much greater. It's much stronger, and it is pulling them out into the ocean. Now, normally, what would happen is people would let go of the rope, which would make sense, right? If you can't save the person, you let go of the rope, and the ocean has claimed another victim. But the supernatural aspect is that this creature can force them to hold on to the rope. They can't let go. They are unable to disengage from this rope. Their hands are somehow supernaturally fused to this rope in that they can't release it. The creature is also capable of moving up the tide. It moves the tide further along the beach. It doesn't just want to take out all the people connected to the rope. It wants to wipe out, as far as it can, all the human beings anywhere near this situation. And it causes the tide to come in and to wash closer and closer to the shore, which also, of course, puts the people on the shore line holding onto this rope at a disadvantage, because they are literally losing ground as the ocean pulls them up to their ankles, up to their knees, up to their waists, up to their shoulders. And then finally, this creature causes a storm. Crashes of lightning and thunder, huge surging waves, breaking on the shoreline. And it basically drags these people connected to this rope under the water. And once it has sufficiently drowned them, everything goes back to being perfectly calm and smooth and still. So we have a supernatural manipulation of natural forces here, which again, we can also look at, as so much cosmic horror does, as this, the power of an angry nature that would otherwise be indifferent, would otherwise almost leave us alone, except that it can't abide the interference of human beings into its world. That once it has drawn our attention, or once I say we have drawn its attention, then it can't. It's not just going to go away. It's not going to go away quietly, and that we are inexorably drawn, that we are pulled without any way of fighting back into this situation, into the sphere of influence of this particular entity. And again, what I like about this is that Lovecraft's style is such that I think sometimes the parallels are a little bit lost or a little bit hazy when he writes these things on his own, which is not, not to criticize his work, but I think there is a refinement here, if that's the right word, a certain drilling down to the message in this particular cosmic horror story, which I would tend to think may be Sonia's style of being somewhat more straightforward than Lovecraft is. That it's not all about the unknown. It is not so much a thing that cannot be described or a thing that cannot be assumed. That and Lovecraft isn't often given credit for this, but in both cases, in his work and her work, there is enough there, I think, that we can see exactly what happened, even if every little detail isn't provided for us. And, as she mentions in the story, as the narrator mentions in the story, the implications are that, especially with any kind of entity that is discovered this way, they're probably not the only ones. That the depth of the ocean must contain a whole species of these things, which are impossibly large and not just powerful because of their size and because of their structure, but because of a certain alien sentience and supernatural ability to work with and control the tide and the ocean itself, which would, in parallel, would be something that could control elements of outer space itself. It is something that powerful, and that there are more than one of them. And now that we are on their radar, so to speak, they are aware of and hostile to the inferior race of creatures which has killed one of their own. So there is that horrific implication there. There is that sense of cosmic horror, really, that cosmic impending doom, that this is not the last that we've seen of these things, that it's not an isolated incident, because and that's the nature of all of these theoretically isolated incidents that formulate a lot of Lovecraft's work. It's the further implication, the cosmic implication, that this is not the only time. This is just the first time, because now we are aware of them and they are aware of us. And there's something kind of terrifying about that, particularly once an angered mother is aware of the danger that you pose to her child. So that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. This is one of our first 2021 glimpses at female writers of cosmic horror, and I look forward to being able to hopefully bring you some more this month and throughout the rest of the year. And I look forward to talking more shenanigans with you next week. Bye.
Cosmic Shenanigans. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Cosmic Shenanigans is written and produced by Mary SanGiovanni. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com.